Sir, I need you to step off this plane immediately. The words land like a thunderclap. Marcus Reed blinks, momentarily frozen, his fingers resting on the corner of his book. The quiet hum of boarding passengers fades as heads turn, curiosity and unease rippling through the cabin. He looks up, meeting the steely gaze of the flight attendant standing over him. Her name tag reads Karen Walsh. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asks, keeping his voice steady. Karen exhales sharply, shifting her weight. "You need to leave the aircraft, sir." A middle-aged woman in the next row clutches her purse tighter. A businessman in first class glances over but quickly averts his gaze. "On what grounds?" Marcus presses, jaw tightening. Karen's lips purse. "I don't have to explain myself." The silence thickens. A few seats back, someone mutters, "Here we go again." "You're making the passengers uncomfortable," Karen states, arms crossing over her neatly pressed uniform. Marcus's brow furrows. He scans the cabin. A young mother shifts in her seat, eyes darting away. A man, gripping a briefcase, clears his throat, suddenly engrossed in his phone. "Uncomfortable how?" Marcus asks, voice measured. Karen's gaze doesn't waver. "Sir, this is not up for discussion." Murmurs spread like wildfire. A deep breath. Marcus reminds himself, stay calm. But beneath his collected exterior, something tightens in his chest. He's seen this before. The coded language, the assumptions, the quiet compliance of those watching. A faint click. Row 12. A young black man tilts his phone upward, recording. His expression is unreadable, but his eyes, sharp, knowing, stay locked on the confrontation. A whisper from the row behind. "This isn't right." A flight attendant lingers near the galley, shifting uncomfortably. Another passenger across the aisle, a middle-aged white man, shakes his head but says nothing. Marcus notices. The silent calculations. The choice between speaking up or looking away. The phone in row 12 keeps recording. A single thought flashes through Marcus's mind. Witnesses matter. Marcus exhales, centering himself. "Can you tell me exactly what I did to make people uncomfortable?" His voice remains even, controlled. Karen's eyes narrow. "Sir, I don't owe you an explanation." The tension climbs a notch. A few rows back, a woman murmurs, "This doesn't feel right." Karen's jaw tightens. "I won't ask again. Stand up, collect your things, and step off the plane." The recording continues. Marcus leans back slightly, choosing his words carefully. "You're asking me to leave, without reason, in front of all these people." He glances around. "You all see what's happening here, don't you?" A shift. Small, but present. A few murmurs of agreement ripple through the crowd. Karen's nostrils flare. This isn't going the way she expected. Heavy footsteps. Two uniformed security officers push through the narrow aisle. "Sir, you need to come with us," one of them says, voice firm but not aggressive. Marcus doesn't move. "Am I under arrest?" A pause. The second officer exhales. "No, but you're being removed from the flight." Karen steps aside, arms folded, satisfaction flickering in her expression. "If I refuse?" Marcus asks. The first officer tightens his grip on his radio. "Then we'll have to remove you by force." That word, force. It lingers, unspoken history threading through it. Marcus swallows, his pulse steady despite the heat creeping up his neck. He glances at the passengers. Some shift uncomfortably, others watch with quiet fascination. They're waiting to see if he'll stand down, if he'll let himself be ushered away like a problem to be erased. His fists clench beneath the tray table. He could argue, he could demand answers, but he knows how fast these moments spiral, and he's so damn tired of proving himself. A slow exhale, he weighs his options, then he makes his decision. Marcus grips the armrest, inhaling deeply. His mind calculates, comply, resist, reveal the badge. Karen shifts impatiently, sensing hesitation. Row 12's phone keeps recording. More passengers are watching now, waiting to see what comes next. Marcus flexes his fingers, steadying himself. One breath in, one breath out. Then, with deliberate calm, he reaches into his jacket. Every muscle in the cabin tenses. Because in America, a black man reaching into his coat is never just that. But Marcus already knows. What happens next will change everything. You have to be twice as good to get half as much. Marcus heard those words before he even understood what they meant. His mother's voice, steady but firm, repeated them like scripture. As a kid in Atlanta, he saw the weight behind them. The way his uncle got pulled over just for driving the wrong car in the wrong neighborhood. The way his mother clenched her jaw every time a store clerk followed them down the aisles. By the time he was 10, he had learned excellence wasn't a choice. It was survival. And even then, it was never enough. So, Marcus worked. Harder than the rest. He graduated at the top of his class. Every achievement a silent response to the doubts he could feel pressing against him. The FBI was his goal, not for power, but for proof. Proof that he belonged. Proof that skill could silence assumptions. And for a while, it seemed to work. He built a reputation, solved cases others couldn't. But the unspoken doubts, they never really disappeared. The badge changed nothing. Marcus knew it every time a security guard tailed him in a high-end store. Every time an older white colleague cracked a joke about diversity hires. Every time he got passed over for a promotion, only to watch a less experienced agent move ahead. Even on the job, he wasn't immune. "You're undercover, right?" A clerk had asked him that once, as he flashed his credentials at a crime scene. As if it was easier to believe he was a suspect than a federal agent. Even success couldn't erase suspicion. The mission had been brutal, weeks buried in deception, blending into a world where trust didn't exist. Marcus was exhausted, craving the quiet hum of a plane, the feeling of heading home. He took his seat, exhaling as he ran a hand over his badge tucked inside his coat. Just one flight, just a few hours of peace. But peace was never guaranteed, and before the plane even left the ground he was reminded of that fact. Marcus stepped onto the plane, exhaling as he searched for his seat. A long day behind him, a few hours of quiet ahead, or so he thought. Then he felt it, that extra second of hesitation. Karen, the flight attendant by the entrance, didn't just glance at him. Her eyes clung to him, scanning, assessing. He offered a polite nod, no reaction. Just that tight-lipped expression, the kind he'd seen before. The kind that measured him, not as a traveler, but as something else. A problem. He shifted his bag higher on his shoulder and kept walking. "Good evening." His voice was calm, respectful. Karen barely looked at him. Her response little more than a stiff nod before she turned away. A few seconds later, a white couple boarded. "Welcome aboard," she greeted them, her voice warm, her smile easy. The woman laughed at something Karen said, their exchange effortless. Marcus kept moving, his jaw tight. It was subtle, but unmistakable. He had been here before. Seated now, Marcus let out a breath, resting his head for a moment. Then, movement. Karen hovered nearby, her gaze flicking toward him again. A moment later, she stepped forward. "Sir, can I see your ticket again?" Marcus frowned, slipping it from his pocket. "I already showed it when I boarded. Just verifying," she said flatly, scanning the details before handing it back. The man beside him raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Marcus glanced across the aisle. Another passenger had just sat down. No second check, just him. He pressed the call button. The day had been long. Water wasn't too much to ask. Karen arrived, expression unreadable. "Can I get a glass of water?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice even. "I'll get to it." She turned away. Minutes passed. He watched her serve drinks to other passengers, bypassing him without a glance. 5 minutes. 10. A different flight attendant passed by, noticed his untouched tray. "Sir, did you need something?" Marcus smiled, but his patience was wearing thin. "Just some water if it's not too much trouble." Within seconds, the cup was in his hands. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus noticed the man in front of him typing away on his laptop. Karen walked by without a word. He reached for his phone to send a quick message. "Sir, device is off now." Karen's voice cut through the air, sharp, commanding. Heads turned. Marcus blinked, locking eyes with the man ahead. His laptop was still open, fingers still moving over the keyboard. No warning, no reprimand. The man glanced at Marcus's phone, then at his own laptop. His expression shifted, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Marcus powered down his screen, jaw clenched. He knew this game. None of these moments stood alone. A glance too long. A greeting too cold. A rule applied unequally. On their own, each could be excused, explained away. But Marcus had seen this before. Airports, restaurants, workplaces. A slow erosion of dignity. A message sent in pieces. Easy to miss if you weren't looking. But Marcus was always looking. Because he had no choice. And he knew exactly where this was going. Marcus shifted in his seat, trying to shake the unease lingering from earlier moments. Just get through the flight, he told himself. But then he caught it, the quick glance from across the aisle. A white woman, middle-aged, pearls resting against her blouse, stealing uneasy looks at him. Her fingers gripped the armrest before she leaned toward Karen. The words were hushed, but Marcus didn't need to hear them. He saw it in Karen's response, the way her shoulders stiffened, her lips pressed into a firm line. Karen's gaze flicked toward him, sharp and assessing. He exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to react. He knew better. He'd seen this play out before. A whisper could change everything, and it just had. Karen moved with purpose, her voice carrying over the low hum of the cabin. "Sir, we've had complaints about your behavior." Marcus looked up, confusion flickering across his face. Complaints? His tone was controlled, measured. Her expression hardened. "You're making passengers uncomfortable." His brows furrowed. "How?" She crossed her arms. "You've been acting aggressive." A slow breath left his lips. Aggressive? He had barely spoken since boarding. "I was just sitting here." Karen's chin lifted, her voice growing sharper. "You're intimidating other passengers." Marcus glanced around. Some passengers avoided eye contact. Others watched, curiosity turning into silent judgment. He could feel the shift in the air, the unspoken weight of suspicion settling over him. This wasn't about discomfort. It was about control. And Karen wasn't backing down. The murmurs started immediately. A man, 2 rows up, whispered something to his wife. A teenage girl held up her phone, the camera's tiny lens now a witness. Others shifted in their seats, unsure whether to believe what they were hearing. Marcus felt the scrutiny closing in. It didn't matter that he had done nothing wrong. In moments like this, innocence was irrelevant. Perception was everything. His hands rested on his knees, fingers pressing into the fabric of his jeans. Stay calm, stay in control. But control was slipping. Because the verdict was already being written. Not by truth, but by glances, whispers, and assumptions. And Marcus knew exactly how this story usually ended. Marcus exhaled, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I'm just asking for clarification," he said, his hands lifting slightly, a gesture of peace. Karen didn't blink. "Sir, you need to leave the plane." The weight of her words settled over him. Leave? Based on what? Passengers turned, waiting for his reaction. One wrong move, one shift in his tone, and this situation could spiral. "I paid for this seat," he said carefully. "I've done nothing wrong." Karen's lips tightened. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Marcus felt his pulse in his ears. A no-win scenario. If he resisted, he'd be the angry black man causing a scene. If he complied, he'd be the man who let them humiliate him without a fight. Either way, he lost. Then, a voice, unexpected. "He didn't do anything." Marcus turned. A white man, mid-30s, was sitting in the next row. His jaw was tight, his eyes defiant. Karen's gaze snapped toward him. "Sir, this is airline policy." The man didn't back down. Policy for what? Sitting quietly? For a second, silence. Then, the shift of a uniform. 2 officers had arrived. Karen stepped aside, her stance triumphant. The choice had never been his to make. A firm grip closed around Marcus's arm. He tensed, breath catching. Not here, not like this. Passengers watched, their expressions a mix of curiosity, discomfort, some satisfaction. He could hear the phone cameras clicking. A spectacle now, a cautionary tale. Humiliation crawled under his skin, burned at his throat. He wanted to fight, to demand fairness, to make them see, but he knew how that would end. So he stood, his movements slow, controlled. Let them have their moment. This wasn't over. His fingers brushed against the edge of his pocket. The weight of his FBI badge was there. A single motion, and everything could change. But why should he have to prove himself? Why should a piece of metal determine whether he was treated with dignity? His fists clenched, then relaxed. This wasn't surrender. This was restraint, because they had already decided who he was, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Not yet. Just as Marcus prepares to rise, a firm voice slices through the charged air. "Hold on, what's going on here?" The tension in the cabin shifts as Captain Reynolds steps forward. His uniform is crisp, his expression unreadable, but his presence alone forces the murmurs to hush. Karen turns, caught off guard. "Captain, I was just handling a situation." He folds his arms. "What situation?" She hesitates. A passenger was causing discomfort." Reynolds glances at Marcus, then scans the rows of watching eyes. "Discomfort?" His voice is sharp, skeptical. "Or an assumption?" The words hang between them. Karen straightens. "Sir, I was just following policy." Reynolds doesn't blink. "And which policy would that be?" A flicker of uncertainty flashes across her face. Marcus exhales slowly, sensing the first shift in momentum. For the first time since this started, someone is questioning her. Marcus doesn't waste a second. With a steady hand, he reaches into his pocket and pulls out his FBI badge, lifting it into view. The reaction is instant. Karen's face drains of color. The security officers falter, their grip on his arm loosening. A hush ripples through the cabin, passengers leaning in, phones still recording. Marcus meets Karen's gaze. "Let's be clear," he says, voice calm but firm. "You falsely accused me. You tried to remove me without cause, and now you're realizing you messed with the wrong person." Karen swallows hard. I didn't know." His expression doesn't waver. "You didn't need to." Captain Reynolds steps closer, eyes narrowing. "Agent Coleman," he addresses Marcus formally, "were you given any valid reason for this?" Marcus shakes his head. Reynolds exhales, his jaw tightening. The balance of power has shifted, and Karen knows it. Karen stumbles over her words. I didn't know you were." A passenger, still recording, mutters, "Oh, she's done for." The atmosphere in the cabin changes. The silent unease that once surrounded Marcus now coils around her. Reynolds doesn't move. "Let me get this straight. You didn't have an issue until you realized who he was?" Karen looks at him, her mouth opening and closing. No excuse comes. Marcus tilts his head slightly. "So, tell me, what exactly was my crime?" She flinches. Passengers shift. Whispers grow louder. The weight of exposure presses down on her. No script, no easy escape. For the first time, she's on the other side of judgment, and she feels it. Marcus doesn't break eye contact. "I'll ask again, why was I being removed?" Karen's breath catches. I was just following protocol." Reynolds crosses his arms. "Then tell me, which protocol states an innocent passenger must be escorted off a plane?" Silence. Marcus lets the moment stretch. He's spent years mastering patience, enduring moments just like this. The difference, this time, the world is watching. Karen opens her mouth, then stops. Passengers whisper among themselves, their voices no longer hushed. A businessman in first class shakes his head. A woman clutching her purse looks disgusted. Reynolds nods toward the security officers. You can release him. They let go immediately. Karen looks around, desperate for support, but there's none left. Whispers turn to murmurs. Murmurs rise into full voices. This is ridiculous. She should be the one leaving. Typical. Only a badge saved him. Karen shifts on her feet, her authority slipping through her fingers. The security officers exchange glances, suddenly aware they're standing on the wrong side of this moment. Marcus exhales, slow and deliberate. He doesn't need to say anything. The court of public opinion has spoken. And Karen? She knows it's over, but this story isn't finished. Not yet. Captain Reynolds exhales, his expression cold and unreadable. Then his voice cuts through the silence. We're not removing him. He turns to Karen, his words deliberate. But you? Step off my plane. A collective gasp ripples through the cabin. Karen's mouth falls open. Wait, what? Captain, I was just... Reynolds doesn't budge. Escalating a situation you created, and now you're done. The weight of his words presses down on her. This wasn't the outcome she expected, and everyone is watching. Karen's voice wavers. Please, I was just doing my job. Reynolds doesn't respond. Security steps forward. Ma'am, you need to come with us. She twists around, searching for support, but the passengers only watch. Some shaking their heads, others raising their phones. The moment she steps into the aisle, a slow clap begins. It builds, spreading row by row. Karen lowers her head. This moment will follow her forever. The internet doesn't take long. FBI agent racially profiled. Flight attendant gets instant karma. The video spreads like wildfire. Millions watch, dissect, and rage. The airline scrambles. A statement is issued, but it's not enough. Karen is fired. Her name trends for all the wrong reasons. The world saw everything, and there's no erasing it now. But Marcus doesn't celebrate. Standing before cameras, he meets their gaze. This wasn't just about me, he says, voice steady. It happens every day, to black men, to black women. The only difference, I had a badge. The silence is deafening. He exhales, the weight of truth pressing down. So, I ask you, what happens to those without one? The cameras flash. The world listens. And for once, change feels possible. Marcus looks directly into the camera. His voice is steady, but the weight of the moment is undeniable. What would you have done in this situation? The words hang in the air. Would you have spoken up? Would you have stayed silent? He lets the question sink in, inviting reflection. Have you ever faced discrimination like this? His gaze sharpens. Let's talk in the comments. Your story matters. His tone shifts, urgent yet understanding. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. A pause. Like, share, subscribe. More people need to see this. His last words land like a hammer. Racism isn't just loud acts of hate. It's the quiet, everyday injustices. A beat, and we must call them out.